Most people walk through life never questioning what their surname actually means. They sign it on documents. They introduce themselves with it. They pass it to their children without a second thought. But some surnames, carried today by perfectly ordinary people, translate directly into some of the most violent words in the ancient world. Killer, slayer, destroyer, sword. The words that warrior cultures used to describe their most feared men. And those words are still sitting in modern surnames right now. You might be carrying one of them. Let me start with one that sounds completely harmless, Chase. It is a common English surname. Thousands of people carry it across Britain and America. It sounds like something to do with running, with pursuit, with a harmless tag. It is not harmless. Chase comes from the old French word chasser, to hunt, to pursue, to run something down until it cannot run anymore. In medieval France, chasser was not a word used for sport. It was a word used for war, for tracking down enemies, for pursuing men across landscapes until they were caught and killed. The medieval French word for a professional hunter, a chasseur, was not a man who hunted deer for pleasure. He was a man who hunted people for a living. A tracker, a pursuer, a man paid to find someone and make sure they did not get away. If your surname is Chase, your family's founding ancestor was almost certainly known in their community for one specific skill: finding things and making sure those things did not escape. That is a different way of thinking about a name most people consider completely ordinary, but Chase is mild compared to what is coming next. The second surname on this list translates into something that made medieval villagers physically nervous when the family arrived. We will get to them in a moment. This next surname sounds like a tradesman, and it is, but the trade is darker than most people realize. Slater comes from the Old English word slaton, to strike, to cut down, to kill. In its most innocent modern interpretation, a slater was a person who laid slate roofing tiles. That interpretation came later. The original Old English root was a killing word, a striking word, a word used to describe what happened to animals, and sometimes to people, when they were brought down violently. The transition from killing word to tradesman word happened gradually through the medieval period as the language evolved and occupational surnames solidified. But the families who first received the surname Slater were not necessarily roof tile specialists. They were families known for a specific physical capability, for striking hard, for bringing things down. In some regional English dialects, slaton retained its violent meaning well into the medieval period, long after surnames had already begun fossilizing into permanent family identifiers, which means the first Slater who passed the name to his children lived in a community that associated his family with violence first and roof tiles second. That association got stuck in the name, and it has been there ever since. The next surname doesn't come from English. It comes from a Germanic warrior tradition so violent that the Romans wrote about it with genuine fear. The surname Gunnar comes from the Old Norse name Gunnar, two elements combined. Gunnar, meaning war or battle, and Ar, meaning warrior. Together, they mean battle warrior, war fighter, the person who enters combat and does not stop. The name Gunnar was not given to gentle men. In Norse and Germanic warrior culture, names were declaration of intent. You named a son Gunnar because you expected him to fight, because you expected him to be remembered for what he did in battle. Gunnar Harmundarson, one of the most famous characters in Icelandic saga literature, was described as the finest warrior of his generation, extraordinary with a bow, deadly with a sword. And he had one quality that the sagas emphasize with particular force. He never looked afraid, even when surrounded, even when outnumbered. even when mortally wounded. He kept fighting with a calmness that his enemies found more frightening than any battle cry. If your surname is Gunner or Gunnarsson, your family name is a direct inheritance from the Norse warrior tradition. A battle name, a war name, a name chosen specifically because the people who carried it were known for what they did when the fighting started. The surname coming next is even older than Gunner, and its meaning leaves absolutely no room for interpretation. The surname Draper. Wait, the cloth seller? This one is not what it seems, and that is exactly the point. In modern English, a draper sells fabric. It is one of the most peaceful occupations imaginable. But draper comes from the old French word drapier. And before drapier meant cloth seller, the root word drap had a secondary meaning that medieval French used with uncomfortable frequency. Drap was specifically the cloth used to wrap bodies. The shroud, the burial cloth, the fabric placed over the dead before they were committed to the earth. A drapier in its original context was not simply a cloth merchant. In some regional medieval French usages, a drapier was specifically associated with preparing the dead. The name draper in English records before 1300 appears in contexts suggesting the original bearer was not selling fabric at the market. They were preparing the dead for burial, an occupation so associated with death that the name itself carried that association permanently into the family line. If your surname is Draper, your family's founding ancestor may have been the person your medieval community called when someone died, the person who came, the person who wrapped, the person who made everything final. The surname at the end of this list takes everything we have covered and condenses it into a single word so direct that medieval scribes sometimes refuse to write it in official records. Mort, 4 letters, 1 syllable, and in the original Old French, 1 meaning, death. Mort comes directly from the Latin mors, death, through the Old French mort, meaning dead or death itself. It does not have a tradesman's secondary meaning. It does not have a softened interpretation. Mort meant death when first attached to a family, and it still means death in every Romance language descended from Latin today. Mort as a surname appeared in English and French records attached to families known for one of 3 things. They lived near a place associated with death, a burial ground, a battlefield, a site of execution, or they were connected to an occupation associated with death, or, the interpretation medieval communities most commonly applied, they were simply people whose presence was associated with violent endings. In medieval French legal records, the Mort family name appears attached to families described with specific consistency. They were effective, they were feared, they were called upon when the outcome required a certain kind of finality. If your surname is Mort, or any direct variant, your family was named after death itself. In a language that did not use that word lightly, most surnames feel ordinary because familiarity makes them invisible. But once you know what these words meant, in the languages that built them, you cannot hear them the same way again. Check your own surname against what you just heard. The name your family gave you might be carrying something ancient, something violent, and something extraordinarily specific about the people who first wore it. Subscribe. See ya.